Magandang tanghali po sa ating lahat. Welcome po muli sa press briefing ngayong araw na to matapos po ang kalahating araw ng trial ni Vice President Sara Duterte sa kanyang impeachment. Kasama po natin ngayon para magbigay ng ating mga mahalagang punto ang ating mga spokesperson, walang iba kundi si Representative Zia Lonta-Adjong ng 1st District ng Lanao del Sur at si Attorney Benjamin J. Toloso Jr., who is also one of the counsel for the prosecution. Para po sa ating panimula, bigyan muna natin pagkakataon si Congressman Adjong for some key points.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. So nasa 18th day na po tayo ng impeachment trial. So ang ating naging testigo ngayon, hostile witness, by the way, ng prosecution direct examination ay si Mr. Ortonio. Si Mr. Ortonio po, base po doon sa testimonya na ay mga nasa 20 years na rin po ang kanyang serbisyo kay Vice President Sara Duterte. Simula po siya ay naging vice mayor ng Davao City in 2008 up to the time that she assumed office on July 1 of 2022 as Vice President of the Republic of the Philippines. Base din po sa testimonya ni Mr. Antonio, when they assumed office as Vice President and simultaneously also appointed him as Assistant Chief of Staff noong July 1, 2022, there was no confidential items or line item pertaining to confidential funds for the Office of the Vice President for the year 2022. So, importante pong naging testimonya dito ni Mr. Ortonio because it detailed the chronological events that happened pertaining to the request up to the time of the utilization of the confidential funds, particularly on the last quarter of 2022. So ito po naging testimonya ni Mr. Ortonio. Today's testimony established an important chronology in Vice President Sara Duterte's request for confidential funds. August 22, 2022, Vice President Sara Duterte had already asked the Department of Budget and Management for exactly 250 million pesos in confidential funds. September 15, DBM asked the OVP for supporting documents. September 16, 2022, the fiscal and financial plan was signed. On the same day, Nolasco was also appointed as part of her security detail. September 19, the OVP submitted to DBM the fiscal and financial plan required under the joint circular governing confidential funds. The required plan was submitted 28 days after the 250 million pesos was requested. Mas nauna po yung request ng 215 million for the confidential funds prior to the plan requested by DBM to be submitted. No? So baliktad po ang nangyari. Nauna muna yung request ng pera, tsaka po pinagplanuhan paano gamitin ang pera. So the central question emerging from today's testimony is simple. Una, ano ba ang basehan ng 250 million pesos para sa confidential funds? Was there already an operational plan on August 22 before the submission or before the transmittal of this request for funding of 250 million confidential funds? Was there a contemporaneous document identifying the confidential operations and calculating their requirements? O hinugot lang ba sa hangin ang 250 million pesos? That is the accountability questions raised by today's testimony of Mr. Antonio. So now, I think Attorney Tolosa would like to add. If not, then we will proceed with receiving your questions and answering them.
Salamat po, Kong Zia. Tanggapin natin ngayon ang mga katanungan. Unahin na natin si Haji. Go ahead.
Magandang tanghali po, Kong Zia and Attorney Jay. Na-highlight po kanina sa first part ng testimonya ni Lemuel Ortonio na may dalawang magkaibang pirma or signature si Vice President Sara Duterte sa dalawang dokumento na napansin po ni Presiding Officer Cheese Escudero. May significance po ba yon or may bigat po ba at allowed po ba yon na gumamit ng dalawang pirma dun po sa mga dokumento na may kinalaman po sa confidential funds?
Well, I think the presiding officer merely wanted to confirm, with the witness if both of those signatures were in fact signed by the Vice President. No? Siguro kasi pinakita sila magkasunod, it's different. So it's just for authenticating the signature. Now, as to whether it's allowed or not, we're not trying to make any issue out of it. No, it's just the fact that may confirmation kahit mukhang magkaiba yan, pero walang question na si Vice Presidente yung pumirma dyan at nag-aproba dun sa mga dokumento na pinirmahan niya.
Well, for clarity, kasi there's an obvious difference, no? Nung unang pinresent doon sa dokumento, magkaiba apparently parang may pagkakaiba yung pirma. That's why the presiding officer asked Mr. Otonio, kasi since he's been with the Vice President for almost 20 years or more, no? Alam na alam niya yung pirma kasi dumadaan sa kanya. Siya yung overall din na nagmamanage doon sa confidential funds. Though ang sinabi naman niya, not necessarily been part of the planning, pero before the confidential funds is being released, yung voucher at saka yung cheque talagang dumadaan sa kanya. So, since the Vice President's signature is all over the place in all of these documents, she must have had that concrete knowledge of how to identify and verify the signatures of the Vice President, the signature of the Vice President rather. So, yun lang man, kinonfront lang naman siya ni presiding officer because these are documents pertaining to the utilization. How come one somehow had a different stroke and the other one medyo parang complete yung kanyang pag-sign, no? So, pero sinabi naman ni Mr. Otonio na pareho kino-confirm niya. That would only give us the idea na talagang malapit ito si Mr. Otonio kay Vice President because she can actually in confidence verify na maski parang magkaiba yung stroke pero kay Vice President pa yan na signature na yan.
Okay, for my last question na lang po, Kong Zia, you've mentioned na may baliktad. Dapat nauna yung physical and financial plan bago po yung request, di ba, for confidential funds. What about po yung significance o sinabing nabatid nila na walang confidential funds yung predecessor, si former Vice President Leni Robredo, so kaya po sila humingi ng confidential funds nung naupo na po si VP Sara. Meron po ba yung may significance po ba yun in any way?
Well, unang-una, from the very start, wala naman talagang direct mandate ng Office of the Vice President para makilahok sa isang counterintelligence or or confidential activities and programs. That's why nag-request sila kasi walang line item in the GAA. Pero ang titingnan natin, yung request nila, when they assume office, weeks after that, in August, kasi kanina, yung sinabi ni, kung di ako nagkakamali, August 20, there was already that request, no, ng 250 million pesos para magkaroon ng confidential funds. So intended talaga siya, doon sa request nila, gumamit na ng programa or activity para makagamit ng confidential funds. Kaya nga, nung lumabas yung 125 million pesos as they requested initially to 250, ang tanong ni Attorney May, no, paano nagamit itong pondo na to? Kasi parang minadali. When they assumed office, walang confidential funds, so automatic, i-link natin yon doon sa testimonya ni Miss Gina Acosta na parang they were accustomed to confidential funds when she was a mayor of Davao City, no? Ang confidential funds na ng Office of the Mayor for 3 years starting 2016 was 200, umabot siya ng 460, naging uniform na yon, yung amount na yon. So there was really that observation, and I think this is a valid observation, that when they assumed office, they brought with them yung kanilang ginagawa sa Davao City, which is to use millions of pesos for confidential activities. Kaya nga, dahil halfway to the end of the 2022, gusto nila na magkaroon ng confidential funds, no? Kung itugma natin yon sa testimonya ni Miss Gina Acosta. Ngayon, the question is, since na-release siya, na medyo na-late siya for a month after the release, after the request, ang intended supposedly dapat na ginagawa for a government expenses and transaction, dapat meron ka na talagang plano. Because that would trigger how much do you need. So you have, for example, a plan and how you identify particular activities, when do you want to implement these particular activities, and how much would you need for the to sufficiently implement these projects. Yun, baliktad. Ang nangyari, nag-request, paglabas nung pag-grant ng request nila, tsaka nila ginalaw at tsaka ata sila nagkaroon ng mga plano-plano. That's why nagkaroon ng shorting oras. Kaya nga naging 11 days lang kung titingnan natin yung usage nung 2022. Supposedly, so dapat mag-trigger siya based on the plan na dapat na paggagamitan ng confidential funds. So what is also striking is that in 11 days, nagamit nila yung 125 million pesos. As when you compare that to the first, second, and third quarter of 2023, the shortest number of days actually had the most number of payouts. No? Nung gumamit sila or nagbayad sila ng purchase of information. In fact, yung sinabi kanina before we took a break, ang tanong kanina ni Miss Attorney May is yung sa 11 days doon sa pagbibigay ng mga paggagamit po ng confidential funds for informants ay meron siyang 132 areas, no, na pinuntahan in 11 days. Same amount, 125,000. When you compare that to the first quarter of 2023, they only went to 127 areas in 52 days, pero the same amount. In the second quarter of 2023, 111 areas where they did all the payment for reward or purchase for information for 67 days. And for the third quarter, 122 areas for 79 days. So anong nagsasabi nito? Ibig sabihin, parang meron talaga siyang pattern para gamitin yung 125 million pesos in every quarterly. So yung going back to your question, it gives us more questions than answer. 11 days ginamit, walang confidential funds sa line item in 2022. Pag upo nila, automatic yun ang una-una nilang ni-request sa DBM ng pagkaroon. Dahil hindi nabigay ng mas maaga, mukhang merong effort talaga na ubusin ng 125 million pesos in just 11 days. No? So yun po yung klaro na nakita po natin in the test or napakinggan po natin sa testimonya ni Mr. Ontortonio. Yeah.
And if I could just if I could just add there quickly, no, dun sa tanong mo din nga na, ano ba bang significance nito? Yung fact that the immediate predecessor, former Vice President Leni Robredo, did not have any confidential funds during her term. No? Pwede ding ma-appreciate ito, no, ng senator judges. Itong fact na madami dito sa supposedly na pinagkagastusan nitong milyon-milyon na confidential funds na to was to secure, no, itong siguraduhin ang seguridad ng Vice Presidente doon sa kanyang mga activities na dinadaluhan, no. But as pointed out yesterday, tulad recently nagkaroon na naman ng tree planting activities, no, na wala ng confidential funds but wala naman toward incident. Same, na pwede nang i-appreciate dyan. During the entire term of incumbency as Vice President of Leni Robredo, no, wala din siyang confidential funds, but there was also no untoward incident. So, pwede yung isama sa appreciation kung na-justify ba talaga yung supposed use ng confidential funds to secure the Vice President's safety. No?
Thank you, Haji. Lanesca, your turn.
Good afternoon po. Lianesca Panti, GMA News Online. Yung question ko lang po kasi meron dun sa direct examination of the Vice President signing liquidation reports. Are these, hindi kasi natuloy, I don't know if it will be asked in the afternoon, so parang naputol. Are these the same liquidation reports na may mga unusual funny names that was submitted by the OVP to the COA? Yun po ba yung pinirmahan doon? Tama
Yung may
po ba?
funny names or unusual names, yun yung mga acknowledgement receipts, no? So those were subsequently submitted to the COA by both the OVP and the DepEd. No? So una muna yan, nag-submit muna sila ng liquidation reports, nakatanggap ng mga AOMs, noting some deficiencies, and then ang sinubmit nila ay mga acknowledgement receipts to support, in an attempt to support yung payments. So the Vice President did not sign the acknowledgement receipts themselves, if that's what you're asking, no? But itong mga liquidation reports, connected ba yun doon? Yes, because they're liquidating the same funds, the same confidential funds.
So sir, yung liquidation report signed by the Vice President, attachment nun yung acknowledgement receipts, tama ba? Or that was the initial liquidation report that they
So far
submitted?
as I remember, that was the initial. To start yung liquidation process, you submit the liquidation report. Tapos, at some point, as testified to by the co-auditors, nagkaroon sila ng AOM asking for proof na ginasta talaga itong mga pera na to, and then sinubmit yung mga ARs. No? But nakalagay dyan, dun sa mga pinirmahan ng Vice President, she approved the use. No? At sinicertify niya doon na it was used for the confidential expenses.
Ang mahalaga na message doon, because since the Vice President certified this to be true copy of all the documents, attached documents, including the ARs, sinacertify niya na tunay na nakatanggap si Mr. Pusa, tunay na nakatanggap si Mr. Pagong, si Miss Pusa at si Miss Belat. So yun yung pag-meaning nung pag-certify niya nitong mga ARs na to as part of the liquidation process or attachment for the utilization of the confidential funds.
So sir, follow up na lang sir, baka ko dun sa request. Yung pag-request ng OVP for confidential fund, meron kasi silang previous arguments na it was the fault also of the OP kasi late na ni-release yung December na sa kanila binigay. So, yung considering what happened, yung testimony kanina, does this mean na the fault was not on the President but rather on them submitting a plan belatedly?
The playing of their victim card does not hold water. Kasi gaslighting yan eh. Diba? Nag-request siya for confidential funds with the intention, in good intention, ang pagbibigay sa kanya, ang pag-grant sa kanya ng confidential funds, in good faith. Wala namang nagsasabing pag binigyan siya ng 125 million pesos, gastusin niya itong buong-buo into 11 days, tapos kung sino-sino lang yung paglalagyan nila at hindi sila mag-liquidate ng maayos. So the more reason for I think if I were be working with the Office of the President, the more disgusted I would be. Na we gave you this in good faith, tapos binudol nyo kami. No? So supposedly dapat hindi sila mag-play victim dito. Ipakita nila kung paano nila ginasta ng maayos. Ipakita nila yung kanilang mga ARs at ipakita nila na hindi dapat sila ma-flag ng COA. Pero what happened is the opposite. No? It was not really about the granting of the request. It was how the funds was implemented. At ayon sa ICFAO, nagka-leche-leche yung kanilang pag-implement ng liquidation ng confidential funds nila.
Yes, and the issue here is not whether or not there was delay in the release of the funds. No? Ang issue dito ay nagamit ba ng tama yung pondo at napatunayan ba yun, no? Kung nagamit ng tama yung pondo. As pointed out a while ago, nung hiningi itong 125 million, ang purpose nito, as ito ay supposedly for projects to be conducted in the 3 months, no? 3 last months of 2022. For October, November, December. Okay? Diba? Again, as explained by Kong Zia kanina, pag humingi ka ng pondo, dapat meron kang plano, meron kang specific na mga projects kung saan mo gagamitin ito. At nung hiningi nila itong 125 million, dapat gagastahin to para sa projects na gagawin again October, November, December. So ang tanong, Obviously, hindi mo na pwedeng gamitin yan sa plinano mong projects for October. Hindi na din pwede sa November. Hindi na din pwede dun sa first half of December. So, kung itong 125 million, dapat yan para yun dun sa buong quarter na yan, paano mo siya ngayon inubos in just 11 days? Yun yung tanong ho dito. Not whether or not may delay ba sa pag-issue? Hindi niyan sinasagot eh. Yung importanteng tanong dito na ginamit ba tong pera na to para dun sa intended purpose niya, para dun sa mga purposes allowed under the joint circular governing the use and liquidation of confidential funds.
Sir, follow-up lang. Kasi understand, wala naman talaga dapat confidential funds si VP Sara for 2022 dahil inadmit nga po, wala naman si VP Lenny nung naupo nga po to sila Ortonio, sila VP Sara. So technically, talagang ni-request po ito, kumbaga, ni VP Sara pagkaupo niya sa pwesto. Sinabi niyo nga po, yun yung una nilang ginawa, di ba? Pag-upo nila, yun yung ni-request sa TBM. So, nakita na rin po ba natin na paglabag na rin po agad sa joint circular dahil under 3.24, kailangan po yung physical and financial plan na aprobado po ng head of agency supporting the request for funds po ng confidential expenses. And September pa pala nila pinadala, kumbaga, or nagkaroon ng PFP, while August pa lang humihingi na sila ng 250 million.
Yes, so procedurally, as explained a while ago, no, kapag humingi ka ng budget, hindi dapat nauuna yung numero na gusto mo lang ng 125 million. Ano? Dapat meron ka na kasing mga proyekto na gusto mong ipatupad, gusto mong gawin. No? At magkakaroon ka din ng costing. Bakit mo naisip, magkano ba ang kailangan mong gastahin para magawa itong mga proyekto na to? And then you'll come up with that amount. No? Para makita mo na, for example, in this case, dahil ito yung mga gusto kong gawin proyekto, ito ang costing niyan, itong gagastuhin ko dyan, ang total dyan, 125 million ang kailangan kong hingin. No? Hindi yan baliktad. Hindi dapat mo una yung numero na hihingin mo, tapos tsaka ka lang gagawa ng plano kung paano ubusin yung 125 million. So now, ano yung nangyari dito? Clearly, no, nung August pa lang, meron na silang request for the budget amounting to 125 million for confidential funds. And afterwards, dun sa succeeding month, dun lang sila gumawa nitong physical and financial plan kung saan nila linagay, kung ano yung projects, kung saan yung paggagamitin. So yes, pasok ba siya dun sa joint circular? Well, mukhang based on the timing, hindi yun na-comply.
May paglabag na po agad, doon pa lang.
It will appear so, no? But we're not saying that they had absolutely no plans at that time that they asked for this amount. But what we're saying is, based on the documents identified earlier by the witness, yan ang maliwanag na lumalabas dun sa chronological na paglatag dyan ng mga events, no, based on the documents, is nauna yung request for 125 million, sumunod yung pagpirma noong physical and financial plan, pagkatapos sinumite itong plan na to sa DBM. Oh. So based on these documents, lumalabas, nauna yung paghingi ng pera bago pag-execute at pag-submit nitong plan.
Can we say na
I think what
nasanay
is
na po?
important is there was a glaring disrespect to follow the joint circular. It only speaks about one thing: her character as a public official, no? Na maski very glaring na may mga violation, it's not really something that would really give them a pause and then think over how they would proceed with their plan of making or implementing confidential activities. No, so it speaks about how the audacity to violate a very basic joint circular. No, it only speaks about one thing, and one character alone. No, that she holds herself above any laws or any policies. That she can disregard any violation, disregard any standing policies governing, especially how to utilize, for example, a specific amount for specific purposes.
We also share the same sentiment po. Sinabi ni Kong Joel Chua last week na, I don't know, maybe baka nasanay na si Vice President Sara Duterte na kailangan niya ng confidential funds kasi galing sa Davao City for 60 million each year. And then pag upo niya, ito po yung unang hiniling niya. Recall that also, Kong Chua, sinabi po niya na meron nga ugong na hinihiling ni VP Sara yung defense portfolio.
Kasama rin po natin, recognize natin ngayon si Representative Terry Ridon ng Bicol Saro. Kasama rin po natin ngayong tanghaling ito.
There's no other explanation to at least describe kung paano ang unang-unang pumasok sa utak nila ay mag-request na ng confidential funds other than what they have already accustomed in Davao, which is meron silang 460 million kada year for confidential funds. So magtataka ka dahil wala dun sa gaan ng 2022 for the Office of the Vice President, immediately na nag-request na rin sila for funding for the confidential funds na gagamitin supposedly nila for third quarter. Spread out in October, September, and December. Pero nakita natin, may attempt talaga na kailangan magastos itong 125 million pesos. Pero nung araw lang, kung saan 11 days, pero may tatandaan nyo, dyan po sa 11 days na yan, may mga araw din po na bakasyon. No? So paano po sila sa Bisaya pa, unsaon nila pagpalit og tambal? No? Paano sila bumili ng mga gamot na yun ang magiging pangbayad nila sa mga katulad ni Mary's Grace Piatos, which amounts to 70,000 pesos. So ang dami pong tanong. Kaya nga sinasabi natin, habang tumatagal po ito, yung dapat na makasagutan na dapat na maibigyan ng Vice President at sa ating mga kababayan, ay nagsasanga-sanga na lang ng katanungan. Perry?
Yeah. Kahit Kong Terry.
Sige, bago po magpatuloy doon sa mga tanong, paumanhin po dahil nahuli ako, kasi hinahanap ko yung safe house kung saan ho napunta. Kasi up until today, hindi ho na ipapaliwanag bakit ganun po kalaki yung safe houses na pera pong ginastos para doon. Kasi yung pong perang pinag-uusapan, 16 million every quarter, alam po ninyo, yung pong pinag-uusapan na ho nating presyo ng safe houses po na ito, pag-upa ng mga bahay mula sa mga pinaka-exclusive na subdivisions sa Pilipinas, katulad ng Forbes Park, Dasmariñas Village. Yung pinakamahal na mga condominium sa loob po ng Bonifacio Global City at ng Makati. So yan po yung level ng safe houses price na pinag-uusapan po natin dito. I'm quite certain, hindi po ganyan po yung mga binabayad na safe houses nung pong mga security sector po natin na meron pong mga confidential funds. And to repeat what Mr. Artonio has been saying, my friends, based on the documents, huli na naman po sila, na linalaro na naman po nila ito pong mga dokumento na ito. At hindi ho natin yan palalagpasin. 16 million every quarter, different days. Tanga ka na lang kung maniniwala ka dun sa paliwanag na mag-aabot-abot yung pong ganun pong presyo pagka mga araw po yung pinag-uusapan na magkakaiba. So hahabulin po namin yan hanggang pinakadulo. And as a final point, ngayon po I think yung po nga pagdinig ng Ombudsman sa budget para sa House proceedings, panawagan na rin ho namin sa Ombudsman na silipin na po nila kung mayroong aktual na malversation na nakomit si Ms. Acosta, si Mr. Lachica, Vice President Sara Duterte, dito po sa paggamit po ng confidential funds. Tingin ko malinaw na talagang linaro, pinera, ito pong confidential funds na ito. Ang pinakadulo, ang may original sin dito sa bagay na ito, hindi si Gina Acosta, hindi si Lachica, si Vice President Sara Duterte. Dahil siya mismo yung pong nag-utos na ibigay ang 125 million mula kay Gina Acosta, papunta ko po kay Mr. Lachica. So yun po muna.
Salamat po, Kong Terry. Dahil mukhang magsisimula na po ulit ang paglilitis, we will have to conclude our press briefing. Salamat po, Congressman Terry Ridon, Kong Sia, at Attorney Jay sa inyong mga paliwanag. Salamat din po sa ating mga kaibigan sa media. Pero sa ating mga kababayan, iwanan po namin kayo ng isang video presentation para lamang po may ugnay natin yung testimonya kahapon
Thank you,
sa
Dr.
mga pangyayari ngayon. We will now play the video. Thank you po.
In the witness stand